Take Command podcast from Odyssey Sports. That's John Keim from ESPN with me, Craig Hoffman, him, Logan Paulson. All right, so quarterback. Speaking of, all of a sudden it appears that Sam Howell is on track to be QB1. What's the latest intel there? And then I'd love to kind of bat this idea around because I actually think this is a great thing for a couple of reasons. But what's the from the reporting intel side, John? What have you been hearing over the weekend?
Well, I think the only question is who presents him in Canton. I think that's the only question left. Like who's going to give him the gold jacket? No. Listen, I think what it is, and I joke because obviously first of all, we're going to have about 7 months of speculation about what could Sam Howell do in 2023, which I think is actually based off what he showed in that last game. It's not the worst thing. It's like, I mean, he certainly showed traits, and he showed traits in college too. So it's not a bad thing. I think where we're at with it is, first of all, he's going to, whenever they cut Carson Wentz, he'll be the only quarterback under contract on the roster, who is on the 53. So there's a natural, this is the guy. They're still going to look for somebody else, but more so sounds like to compete with him. And if they don't win the job, then you're going to back him up. Who can be that guy? And it could be Taylor Heineke. It could be someone else of that caliber, a guy who would be considered a very solid a high-end backup, but a guy who can go out there and win. If he has to start 5 or 6 games, can win 3 or 4 for you. So that's kind of like where it seems like they're going to go with this. Now, you always have to leave out that, well, you never know, because what if so-and-so becomes available and all it takes is X, and you love that guy in the past, like, what do you do? But right now the signs point to the other. And again, I think it goes back to a lot that these guys liked him before the draft. And I think they would have, and I've talked about this before, but they would have drafted him higher had they not traded for Carson Wentz. So I think it's not like hindsight hearing that they liked him. It was before the draft I heard that they liked him. At least certainly some over there liked him. And so I think there's legit intrigue and optimism about him. But I think you have to then that's why it's going to be important. The coordinator is somebody who has worked with young quarterbacks and knows how to develop them. And somebody whose system, as Logan said, protects the quarterback as well. That's going to be a big deal, because you're not going to just go out there and start flinging the ball 40 times a game with Sam Howell next year. You want to put him in a good spot. And I think we saw the other day in one game, small sample size, but you saw some of what he can do in certain situations. So, I think there is a definite intrigue and optimism about him, but I think they also aren't ready to just say he's absolutely the number one going into the season. It's in the offseason. He's going to go in there as a number one, going to bring someone else in there to compete, and then see where it goes. But he's got a good start on it.
I mean, I I totally agree. I mean, I think like in the last week, of the season, like after the victory over Dallas, like that's what everyone was talking about in the building. That's kind of the direction it seemed it was going. So now that it's here, it's really not surprising. I agree with John. I think he's got some traits. I think you feel excited about him. I think the thing that is more kind of dubious, in my opinion, is like, can they hit on 2 offensive linemen this offseason? Right. That becomes like the bigger question, in my opinion, because like you can make this work. I think look at Seattle. I think Seattle's a very interesting kind of juxtaposition. You have a guy who's been a journeyman quarterback, comes in, plays really well, but you also get 2 rookie offensive linemen who were taken very high, who hit and played very well for them for most of the season. And their offense played as they played. When those 2 young tackles played well, the offense was good. When they played poorly, the offense was bad. And so to me, like, yes, it's exciting to kind of draft a young offensive lineman, but look at Evan Neal, for example. Look at Ike Ekwonu. Like, it took those guys a couple of weeks, and Evan Neal is still figuring it out.
Correct.
So how do you shore up that
It took Andrew Thomas a year or so to figure it out.
Yep. A year, like a full year. Yeah. Now he's one of the best guys in the
NFL,
but it took a year to get there. Yeah, but so I think that's something that it seems like it's close, right? It seems like, oh yeah, like there's the door. We just got to walk through it. But I think it's a smaller margin for error than people think. And I think that to me becomes the more interesting storyline, because I agree. Sam showed traits, he showed qualities, and he's got, like all those things are good. But unless you find a way to make sure that he's not at a buffet table every time he's playing a defense, like that's going to be tough. And you got to hit on two positions that traditionally evaluate very easily, and it should be good to hit them, right? Like the offensive line compared to corner tend to be easier evaluations, for example. But the timetable isn't always immediately a good football player. And so if you're Ron, like, how do you manage some of that risk?
That's a good point. And I do have to point out that only a former run blocking tight end in the NFL would say, as exciting as it would be to draft a lineman in the first round, nobody else is going to say that. So that's, I have to smile at that one.
Hey, if you asterisk it with, lets you start Sam Howell, the fan base is in. If we can draft a punter in the first round and that lets everybody start Sam Howell, well, I guess that's a bad example because Tress is here. It'd be so mad because Tress is so good. But you get the point. It does. If we could draft another long snapper, all due respect to Cameron Cheeseman, and it meant Sam Howell started, the fan base would be psyched.
Yes, they would be. But I will say, to Logan's point, yes, it's very difficult to get a guy to come in and do it. I think the other key is you need to really build up that depth on the line if you're going to play this kind of style of football. And I don't think it's really the 2-to-1 ratio is, you're not going to achieve that. Games,
I also feel like that quote got taken terribly out of context. Like, I feel like what you talked about is that he was talking specifically about the Dallas game. That, like, because the game flow, they got to 2-to-1, and that's how it worked out. And everyone's like, that's the goal. It's like, no, it's not. He was talking about the game yesterday. What are you guys saying?
I think he's talking about that. I think it's also the mentality of how you want to be. And I think in their minds, it's 2-to-1 comes from, you're having success early, and then you take a 2-touchdown lead in the fourth quarter,
right?
Icing it away with the run game. Well, that's every coach's dream scenario, but but I do think it speaks more to the mentality of what they want to be, as much as whatever the numbers are. 2-to-1, again, you're not going to achieve that. Certainly, maybe in some games you will, but overall, it's really hard. So, but it's the mentality of how you want to be. You want to be that. Like Kyle Shanahan's offense is based a lot off the run game, but they're not 60-40 run.
Right.
They're pretty close to 50-50, but so much of that 50-50 is based off an element of the element of the run game. And which I know, Logan, you love, but I love watching that offense for that reason. But it's so much based off, they want to do this and it looks like this, yet it's a pass. So to me, that's all based off the run mentality and the run game. And so I think that's what they'd like to be. So you get that run heavy, and you get the play action off of that in addition to the quick game. But so I think the question there too, along the line is, do you push Sam Cosmi inside? And my guess is that's what ultimately happens. And you go find the right tackle in the first round, maybe if there's somebody there. The other thing is, I would not force a pick at 16 as far as the line goes.
Right.
It's got to be somebody that you like. And when teams force that, then you end up in trouble. Now, part of the reason why I think linemen hit a little bit more, because if you do force a tackle, you take a tackle, let's say you take a tackle at number 5, and he shows in the first camp that he can't be a tackle, you can make him an all-pro guard, right? And then he signs with Jacksonville a few years later. But you know what I mean? But it gives you more hit ability because of that. But if you're pushing Cosmi inside, you need this guy to hit as a tackle. So get a good tackle there if you can. And I would take another guy in the first several rounds. I try to add another couple picks in those first 4 rounds to then get another guard in there, a guard center, somebody else inside, because if you're going to play that style, you better have strong replacements. And I think one of the issues that they had this year is they didn't replace the starters they lost well, but the ones they did elevate, guys that should have been depth guys ended up starting, and it robs your depth. So I think that's something they have to work out. But to me, that is the number one thing. All the other stuff aside, you can mask some things with the coordinator and the play calls, but you need to have that strong line. And that's what Rivera said he wants to build. They have a really good defensive line right now with the addition of Ridgeway, and we'll see what Mathis becomes. And then if they keep paying, you have an excellent defensive line rotation. But can you get that in the O-line? I think that remains to be seen. And that is the number one job this offseason.
Yeah, a couple of things just to tack on there. There's a reason why Warren Sharp does a lot of his stats on first and second down in the first half.
Yes.
And when you talk about
Right.
like the
He gets
predictability
more
of these
emphasis.
types of things, the ratios, how often you run or pass on first down, like he limits it to those situations because game flow tends to dictate a lot of the larger things.
Correct.
So like
Correct.
better teams run the football more because they're up in games. And so by the end, like your ratios are
Right.
messed up. But what do they look like? How
Correct.
did they get the lead? And so that's something that'll be interesting. We'll have to have Warren back on the show. I'm sure you've
And,
had Warren
and
before to talk on your show about those things and how Washington approaches it.
right. And what I think the other interesting part of that too is like when, because there is the desire that you have guys who can be explosive on the outside with those three receivers, all can have a level of explosiveness that can help this offense. How do you get them involved with it? When do you get them involved with it? And then when do you take your shots? And so if you go to the Kyle model, a lot of those shots are first down play action. And he's
Right.
really good with that because of that. And I think because again, that they want to run the ball and they make it look that way, but you run the heavy play action off of that and it leads to some bigger plays. And then other plays come within, like the other day, we saw them getting the ball to Samuel on some shorter throws, but they create space with alignment, with route combos, etc. And then suddenly you have Deebo Samuel running away from guys underneath and turning a 5-yard catch into a 25-yard gain. I think we saw an element of that with Dotson in the finale. So
Yeah.
That too. I don't even know how I got on that part. Oh, you're talking about the first and second downs. So it's just a way. How do you get to certain things? And you're right. It's not just as simple as looking at a percentage of run pass. Because then the other thing with that always kind of drives me nuts, a little bit nuts. And Logan, maybe you can talk more on this, but when you have, I remember just talking to people in the past, like the run pass ratio, 50-50, it doesn't always tell you if you're balanced or it doesn't tell you if you're balanced or not. The balance to me comes in, Logan, to value your input here, but it comes on what kind of runs are you using? What kind of throws are you using? How are you using people? So even within the run game, just because you run it 50% of the time doesn't mean you're balanced. What if you're running the same things off of the same action, et cetera? How do you get to those runs? I think that's where, and how do you get to those passes? That to me is where the true balance is. And that's a much deeper dive than I can do.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great point. Like, I hate that one of my least favorite statistics in the NFL is when they say person X runs the ball 30 times, they win the game. It's a spurious correlation. It's correlated because they're being really efficient on first and second down, and they have a high third down conversion rate. Those metrics are more indicative, right? So to me, it's not the running necessarily that gets you there. It's that, like you're saying, it's the balance and it's the rhythm. It's
Right.
like, so I'm going to go back to the San Francisco game here, and it was like Scott was like he knew that they needed to run the football. So they came out and they ran the football, and they just ran it, and they just bashed their head against the wall. A different offensive coordinator takes that and they say, how do we loosen this up to get back to the run? Let's throw the football off of play action, off of keeper, off of screen, whatever it is, off of kind of some misdirection action to open up the pass concept and get them out of these kind of heavy run structures and then get back to the run. The balance comes off of that type of rhythm.
Right.
It's not give the running back 30 touches and you're going to win the game. Like that's not how that works. Right. So
No.
I think having someone that understands that and understands that they can support a young quarterback with that is something that's really important. So it's like, it goes back to the coordinator thing. You need to have someone who's familiar with that. Kubiak is kind of like the first disciple of Mike Shanahan, then Mike Shanahan, Kyle Shanahan, Mike McDaniel, Matt LaFleur, all those guys, they run a version of this offense.
Yeah.
They run a version of this. And I don't think anyone would say those offenses aren't explosive. They are explosive offenses. They find good chunk plays. They insulate the quarterback. They give them easy decisions. Like, look at Justin Jefferson. They're running a version of this Kyle Shanahan offense, right? And he's leading the NFL in explosive plays. Like, that's what you can get out of this. So it's not this arcane, let's go back to this 2-and-1 like leather helmets thing. It's like, that is innovative offense. And you need someone who understands that innovation and that level of nuance. So I think that's something that's interesting. But kind of back to the original point, it's like, how do you put him in the best position to do that? Sam Howell, how do you make sure you get good offensive linemen to do that? And how do you make sure you get a coordinator that can do that? So it's all there. Like, the path is there. It's just, it's a tough road. I think the margin for error on this it's a little bit smaller than a lot of fans want to acknowledge, I want to say.
Right. But at the same time, like, this is what drives me nuts when it's like, well, how they want to run the ball, but I got to get the ball to the playmakers. If only there was a way they could do both by finding some balance and playing one off the other. It's like the biggest failing of Scott Turner's 2022 season as the offensive coordinator, I'll limit it to just this season, is the lack of play action use, because their run game was so effective at times, and play action is how you generate big plays most often in the NFL. And they did not use it enough, and they did not leverage the things they did well and the skill sets they have to create big explosive plays. And it's just so disappointing. And ultimately it's why I think his removal is justified, even though there's a bunch of other structural issues that you could easily point to and say, well, how is he expected to perform under these circumstances? Well, you evaluate the job that he did, and you go, he didn't come close to maximizing what he had, even if any reasonable person would have wanted more from their quarterback, from their offensive line, etc. And by the way, the things that he didn't do would have helped those pieces be better. And that is the frustrating part, where it's just there's this gigantic, somewhat obvious gap that just was never filled throughout the season.
Well, and to that point, it is funny because you'd hear, it wouldn't be widespread, but certainly there was a lot of dissatisfaction with Scott. And I think, not just in the fan base. I mean, I think if you certainly knew the players were frustrated, especially at the end. That's when it started to come out a lot more, and that the risk was less in getting rid of him than it was in bringing him back. Because if it didn't improve, then you've completely lost the team, and that was a big risk. But to the point with what you're saying, I'd hear from people like, the line sucks, the quarterback sucks, they got to fire Scott Turner. Well, it's kind of hard if you think that they don't have that. Then what is he supposed to do? However, I do remember back in the day when Kyle was here calling plays, and I always it's funny because Kyle's become like the Graham Puba of Washington play callers or whatever, but he was really, really good. And I do remember maybe he's Yoda for them, but I do remember there was dissatisfaction with him among the fan base, partly because they didn't like Mike, and so they didn't like Kyle by extension, whatever. And I also know, I don't know that it was a majority, but you heard it, right? But I remember in 2011 watching his offense and watching guys like Dante Stallworth and Jabbar Gaffney at the end of their careers getting open on these route concepts. And I'm like, well, it's there. So this stuff is working. It's just that you had John Beck and Rex Grossman throwing passes to him. And Rex, they would move the ball. Then you get in the red zone, he's throwing a pick, and sometimes Rex knew he couldn't help himself sometimes. It's kind of like a guy, but it's like a guy who wants to go on a diet. And it's like, my God, that cherry pie looks good. All I need is some ice cream on it, a la mode. And there we go. And now next thing you know, that diet, all this commitment to the diet is over within a couple hours, right? That's a little bit how Rex was throwing the ball. He wanted to take care of it. And then you see something that's like, oh baby, let's go. And then it would be a pick. So, but what the point of it is, you saw that the offense worked, and you wondered more so what would it look like with better talent there? Because again, after that year, Gaffney and Stallworth were out of the league, and you didn't hear from Beck or Grossman again in the NFL. I mean, Rex was here as a backup, but that's it. So, but you saw it work. You saw the chess game that he would play to get guys open, and how things married, et cetera, the concepts. And that's always a big thing, the marriage, as in Cooley would talk about this, Logan, you talk about the marriage of concepts for the run and the pass game. And I thought that sometimes that was a hard thing to see as well, because you didn't always see guys getting lulled in hard by play action when they did run it. And why was that? And that's, was it formation tendencies preventing that? What was it about that are you running it out of certain looks that you don't really run the ball out of enough to fool? I don't know. So there was just a lot of things, but anyway, I'm rambling on that, but they kind of, I think I was backing up your point, I think.
Yeah, no, you were. All right. Last thing I want to talk about on the quarterback front. To me, this is actually a kind of fortuitous development in this way. I had a huge concern that Rivera was going to spend big on quarterback. It wasn't going to work. And big could have been monetarily. It could have been draft capital, like some sort of capital that you use to acquire a premier quarterback or a premier quarterback prospect. And that it was going to go sideways and he was going to get removed by the new owner at some point, either after next year or during next year. And then you have this same stupid alignment that you've had in the last couple of coaches where Kyle and Mike come in and inherit quarterback. They draft a quarterback who's kind of forced on them by ownership. And then things go sideways. Eventually they get fired. Then Jay comes in. He inherits Robert. Eventually he's able to get to Kirk. They don't hold on to Kirk, and then you get Jay and Dwayne. Like the whole misalignment of coach and quarterback. Correct. And then we were on that path again. What Sam Howell being the favorite, because it's not locked in by any means, but the favorite to be QB1 does is say, all right, Ron, let's see what you can do with this guy. If it works out well, then you've got your quarterback and you can continue. And if it doesn't, then the new owner can hire a new GM and a new coach, and that new person can come in as a quarterback. And I think it's very fortuitous because it's the job of an owner or a team president to have a longer view than the coach. And in this particular case, the owner's view ends sometime later this year. There is no team president on the football side. It is Ron Rivera, essentially. And then all of a sudden, the next most powerful person is either the head coach in this particular case or the GM who is tied to the head coach in this particular case. So to me, John, like the Commanders kind of dodge a bullet here. One, I actually think it's probably the best option is to build around Sam and invest in other places. And this is actually, even with a longer view, probably the best strategy unless something unforeseen becomes available at that position. But it also prevents them from getting in this rut. And I think that is a kind of a fortuitous bounce, if you will, of organizational luck for an organization that doesn't seem to get very many lucky bounces very often.
Yeah, no, I think that would be, and it's funny because if there's a quarterback coming out, like you're Jacksonville and you have the number 1 pick and it's Trevor Lawrence, regardless of who you're taking that person, right? It's a no-brainer pick because anybody in your position is going to take him. So any coach is going to want to work with him. It's harder when you have some other quarterbacks, maybe that you're not sure what the new group thinks of them. And so like with Chicago, with Justin Fields, you took him in the, kind of almost mid first round, a little bit, I guess in that 10 to 15 range in the first round. So like, does a new group like him or not? And do they make it work with them? And you got a year to see. And if it doesn't work, then you can go somewhere else. But you do feel like, well, you have to see if it works with this guy. And so yeah, I think that, would you take a first round pick this year? No, I wouldn't do that. And I don't think they will either. I don't know that anybody I don't know that the guy they would want to develop would be there at 16 anyway. And I don't think you're going to want to trade up and expend the capital to get that guy this year. So yeah, I think that's not a bad setup. And I don't have a problem if they say we're going to build around Sam Howell. If that's what they're going to say, like, I get it. Is he the long-term answer? I don't know, but is he a higher level does he have a higher ceiling than a Heineke? Yes, he does, because he's Heineke with a stronger arm in some cases. And so I think it's justified to go that way, but I'd also have a strong guy right there with him, because if it doesn't, then you want that. And also not only that, but there are guys, I think one of the things, and that I think that Wentz and Heineke deserve credit for, is their willingness, I think, to help him. And I think I think that sounds like it was a very good QB room. It doesn't always happen that way. I've seen it the opposite here. And
here with some of the folks that have come through.
Believe it or not, there were some times where it was not harmonious in that room. But I think it's hard to get guys like, I think this is where I always bring up a guy like Jacoby Brissett, only because it's the level and the professionalism that the guy has, that he can go in and play. And if he doesn't, he can handle the other role as well, because it's what he's always done. Same with Heineke. I know he'd be okay backing up Howell because he likes him a lot. So you need a guy who can do both things for you. And if they're not starting, they're going to help the guy versus work to not help him. So I think that's a lot of what, I think you're looking for at that position. But yeah, I think you're like, when Chicago took Justin Fields, my first, as an Ohio State guy, I'm like, I don't like that pick for him, because you knew that they were going to probably change coaches within a year. And so then you're going to have to learn another system and all that. And it makes it hard on a young quarterback. And so much of that success or failure for young quarterbacks is based on where do you go? What plan do they have for you? How much time are they willing to give you? And I think for Howell, that's also certainly the case. And the higher the draft pick you are, the more time they give you. So Howell actually found himself in a really good spot where, as a 5th round pick, playing one game, one start, that he's already intriguing enough to go in a certain direction in one off season, you know?
Yeah.
I rambled there. I don't even know what direction I was going, but
that's what happens when you're an hour into the podcast. If people continue to listen the whole hour through, they get rewarded with a good quality John Keim ramble.
It was good. It was awesome. I don't disagree with anything you said, John. So
same. Anything else that anybody wants to say before this podcast ends?
No.
Okay.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy Thanksgiving.
Can you still say, is it, I guess it's still Happy New Year. It's January. We're doing this in January 17th. Is it still Happy New Year?
I feel like Chris Berman was always big on the let me be the first or the last, depending on something around a holiday. Like it's a couple days after Thanksgiving, be like, let me be the first to wish you. And you'd be like, okay, Boomer, it's a little early, but thanks for your heart's in the right place. Thanks for the well wishes through my television. Now let's rumble and bumble and stumble into some highlights, shall we?
There you go.
All right. John Keim. John Keim Report podcast. Anywhere you're listening to this podcast or watching, if you're on YouTube, make sure you subscribe to the Empire Media page for that, AMPIRE. Got that right, I think. Spelling not always my strong suit, but Bram did a good job naming the company something that rhymes. You can also read his work at ESPN.com. Follow him on Twitter at John_Keim. Anything else, John, that your Instagram?
I'm on Instagram. I think it's John Keim ESPN. So it is. Not anything. It is John Keim ESPN.
There you go. Because you put some news and nuggets and film
I
stuff
do put
up
some
on
stuff
there
up
too.
there. And you know, Instagram for me has become a very big culinary place. That the hard part, because like you find one thing you like on there, and next thing you know, you get bombarded with stuff. And I found some stretches that I like on there. Next thing you know, I have 500 stretch videos coming at me. Then I find like a couple recipes that I really liked.
But if you think Instagram's bad, don't you go near TikTok. That TikTok will have you down a rabbit hole like you wouldn't believe.
I think my TikTok days are behind me. I'm like I said, I just wait. I tell my kids, like, I'll see it on Instagram in 2 months. So there you go.
That's also very true. All right, just make sure you follow John in all of those places as if you're not already. Logan and I will be back on Thursday with a fresh pod. So we'll talk to you then. Thanks for listening to Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command. First, why don't you like it? It lets other people know that it was good, and then they should watch it too. And Logan, we have a new exclusive home for full episodes.
We do. 1067 The Fans YouTube page. Go check it out and please subscribe.
Yeah, do what Logan said.
Do it.
Very, very smart.